Hey guys, I'm Luke Johnson. Welcome back to another installment of our discussion of poetry with Hunt Lyman. What are we going to be doing today, Hunt?
Well, I thought you had asked about poems that I love and poems I think would be fun to do. And so we're going to be talking about Tennyson's Ulysses today. Is a poem I have a lot of connection with. But I also thought it might make sense to talk, you and I have had some conversations off camera about sort of where we see this being targeted, what kind of people we're sort of, because it's fun for me to talk about poetry, but I also want to think about who might be watching this, and from my perspective, I would hope that that people would be watching this if they're interested in learning about the poem, if they feel like maybe this is a poem that is intimidating, or that they look at it and say, well, I don't even know where to begin, and that we sort of start with that, and that's what I want to do with you today, is kind of walk through the poem and try to show you what I think is most significant or most important. So I guess starting off, Tennyson, I'm not going to go much into any of the biographical details. That's easy to pick up somewhere else. But, when you look at this poem, you hear this poem, Ulysses. Do you know anything about the poem? Do you come at it with anything?
All I know about Ulysses is I have read Joyce's Ulysses, and I know the Odyssey. I know kind of the general structure of the Odyssey, but I know nothing else about the poem.
Okay, and Tennyson, does that ring any bells?
I know the line "Nature red in tooth and claw." Right, is that from this poem?
It is not from this poem.
What poem is that one from?
I have no idea. Actually, I know it too, but I don't know what it's from. Yeah.
Oh, it's something about a tiger or something, isn't it?
Well, that's
Blake.
Yeah. So Tennyson he's a Victorian poet, so he's writing after Keats, and he is, a poet of national stature. He's somebody that certainly by the end of his life, everyone looks to him for, he is the voice of England in a lot of ways. And, he's certainly capable of doing things like he wrote The Charge of the Light Brigade, which is a poem that was actually published in the newspaper almost immediately after. And I have a lot of students who love that poem. I don't love the poem. I think it's fine, but it certainly is a poem that was written and published almost immediately. And so there's that part of Tennyson, and then there's this part of Tennyson, which is much more sort of meditative, and you have the sense that this is a poem that went through a very long kind of process.
Did his is it fair to say that when a poet writes that they are authors, or what we would just say the poets?
Yeah.
So if you divide up the corpus of their work or whatever, do you talk about Tennyson as having both styles of poetic compositions at the same time, or is this,
that's how I think of it.
Or is this like the late Tennyson versus the early Tennyson, or was he doing both styles simultaneously?
I think that this is what I would consider to be. I consider Ulysses to be very much mature Tennyson.
Okay,
and I think that Tennyson reads best when he's chewed over his subject for a while. Mm-hmm. So here's the poem. And I know it's sort of funny to be reading a piece of paper when we're online, but so a couple things. And if anyone is interested in pulling it up, it's easy to Google and get it. So it little profits that an idle king by this still hearth among these barren crags, matched with an aged wife, I meet unequal laws into a savage race that hoard and sleep and feed and know not me. Now I'm going to go back on this in a couple of different ways, but just a couple of things to establish kind of at the beginning. Always in my mind, when you start with a poem, and the first thing I would say, looking at this poem, I say, wow, this is a long poem, right? I mean, it is extensive. It's 2 pages, many lines and so on. And so I feel like I need to start somewhere to say, okay, where am I going with this? And a couple things that I would notice. First of all, who's the speaker in the poem? It actually is titled Ulysses. It doesn't have that title here. And by this first sentence, you have the first person, right? I meet and dole unequal laws unto a savage race. So this is Ulysses speaking, okay? And the other thing that I would just always notice, and I'm not going to go into this much because among other things, it's not that important, but structurally. Okay, so you were going to ask.
Well, I think it's important to say that this is the Ulysses from the Odyssey, right?
Right, exactly.
And maybe just for the sake of the audience, maybe just to say a little bit about who the Ulysses in the Odyssey was.
Odysseus or Ulysses, same person, is left Troy after the Battle of Troy and went home with his crew and spent 10 years getting home. Basically, because he was supported by some gods, he had other gods who were working against him. He had various places where he stopped at a island of a beautiful, magical, and kind of evil woman. At the Cyclops who killed many of his shipmates and so on, and eventually made it home to Penelope, his wife, who had been faithful for him for 10 years. And Penelope, the whole time, the suitors who were in her house had sort of taken over her house, were eating her food, were impinging on her hospitality, trying to get her to choose and marry one of them. And what she did is she would say that she was going to be creating, working on a loom upstairs, and when she was finished with her work of art, then she would make the decision. But she would sneak up at night afterwards and undo the work she had done, so that because she was waiting for Odysseus to get back. Ulysses, Odysseus, same person, and. It's a great story for those who haven't read. I mean, it's a fantastic story. It's a fantastic adventure story, and one of the best parts is at the very end when Odysseus comes back. He draws a bow. He comes back disguised as a beggar and starts killing suitors right and left, and creates this huge bloodbath. So, I mean, it's a tremendously exciting story. And one of the ways that this works is that this poem works. Is Tennyson is taking the idea of saying, okay, but what happened to Odysseus then? I mean, here's somebody who in the Odyssey all the way through has been thinking about, getting home, getting back to his home, back to his wife, back to his son. But then once he had done this and once he had, killed the suitors and reestablished himself, was he really going to be happy, sort of saying, yeah, that's it now, I'm just going to sort of settle back and, start binge watching stuff on Netflix, And I think that Tennyson's idea was, no, that really wasn't going to happen with Ulysses, because he was by this point a traveler in his very core, in his very nature, and he was not going to be able to do that.
So Tennyson sort of took it upon himself to amend the Odyssey, to kind of be like, okay, this is what happened.
To add to it, yeah.
Yeah, so this is what happened when the lights dimmed and the credits came down, and then here's the rest of the story. Fascinating.
And so the idea is you want to kind of imagine Ulysses as, now he is the king of, a group of people. He is with his wife. He is in some far off place where he is safe, probably not Ithaca, where he was actually returning to. I mean, there's a legend. I don't actually know how this all fit. There's a legend that he, went in with his oar over his shoulder until someone asked him if that was a farming tool, and he said, "This is where I'll settle now." I don't know where that legend comes from, and I don't think Tennyson's directly drawing on it. But anyway, the idea that that now he is, he is settled, but he's unsettled. In other words, still for him, he is restless. The wanderer. He is the restless one, and he's kind of recognizing that about himself. So, this is divided into three long stanzas. What I was going to say before also structurally, and I don't want to do this too much, but just let's look at the first couple of lines here. It little profits that an idle king. Okay, so structurally, this is following a certain kind of rhythm. It is, it little profits that an idle king. So it's unstressed stress. It little profits that an idle, and you've got of those metrical feet, that's called an iamb, unstressed, stressed together, and you have 5 of them together. So it's iambic pentameter. So that's what it little profits that an idle king by this still hearth among these barren crags, matched with an aged wife I meet and dole. Okay, it goes all the way through. It is unrhymed iambic pentameter.
And there's no variation. It does that for every single line.
It does, I believe. Now, one of the things you can do when you're, and people do this all the time with Shakespeare, is you can find slight variations. And in Shakespeare, people will argue that that is meant to indicate something you're supposed to do with the text. In other words, if you were unsettled in your mind, you might find the iambic pentameter varying slightly. I don't believe there are variations of that kind here.
How as a layperson who doesn't know anything about poetry, what would be the cue that this is in iambic pentameter? Like, do you know that just by looking at it? Can you see the structure of the poem, or
sure?
Like, what's a dead giveaway that something's in iambic pentameter?
Well, because anything that is that is British, in a classical tradition after Shakespeare, it's something you would always you'd be aware of and you would check. This is unrhymed iambic pentameter. It's called blank verse, and it is the most common poetic form. Most of Shakespeare that is not in prose, because some of Shakespeare is in prose, most of Shakespeare is written in iambic pentameter.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Cool.
And it's partly because, I mean, actually in Shakespeare, this is largely because iambic pentameter is by far the easiest thing to memorize. It is much easier to memorize iambic pentameter than prose. And that's one of the reasons that Shakespeare wrote an iambic pentameter. But it's very close to natural sounding speech. It doesn't sound affected like a lot of other verse forms do. It's relatively easy even to speak in iambic pentameter if that's the decision that you want to make. But it does provide a structure as well. So this is iambic pentameter, blank verse all the way through.
So when you recite it, you emphasize the stresses and pauses there or whatever, but when you're reciting it normally, how much attention do you pay to that?
You don't have to pay any attention to it. It will work its own magic naturally. If you overemphasize the iambic pentameter, no one would ever say, it little profits that an idle king, right? I mean, you wouldn't, it little profits that an idle king. That's the way you say the line. But the fact that it is iambic pentameter makes it much easier for your brain to latch onto.
And I'm sure there's a whole story and a whole rivulet that we could talk about why this works.
Right.
Why iambic pentameter is the go-to form of poetic composition.
Right. But I think we've spent enough on it now. Let's move on to it. But I mean, so when we look at this beginning, okay, and I think that the way to do this is to go through it and be sure we sort of understand it all. And so let's do it. I mean, actually, I think that the best way to go through poems is to do it sentence by sentence, right? Because poems are written in sentences. People who stop at the end of the line are going to find themselves, particularly on a pentameter, it's not going to make any sense at all because the unit of meaning is not the line. That's the unit of rhythm, right? So let's do it sentence by sentence. It little profits that an idle king by this still hearth among these barren crags, matched with an aged wife, I meet and dole unequal laws unto a savage race that hoard and sleep and feed and know not me. So here's Ulysses. He's speaking. He's in a place. He's by a still hearth. He's among barren crags. He is with his wife, who is now identified as aged. Perhaps not the beauty that Penelope was. And what he is doing is he is ruling a savage race. And it sort of seems in a way. I mean, this is some of my imagination coming in, but maybe in a way that is not. He says they're unequal laws, so maybe it's a little bit unfair. Maybe he's not really into this. Maybe this is not what he really wants to do. Much better, dealing with the crisis of the moment. Which was his whole escape, back home, than he is with trying to have something stable. And then this to me is where the poem really starts to find its center, right? Because what it's about Ulysses recognizing who he is at this point in his life. I cannot rest from travel, right? I will drink life to the lees. All times I have enjoyed greatly, have suffered greatly, both with those that love me and alone on shore, and when through scudding drifts the rainy Hyades vex the dim sea. Okay, that's a colon, but it's essentially a period, right? So here's our second sentence, right? So what's he saying here? I've enjoyed, I've suffered, I've lived a rich, full life. Sometimes I've been alone, sometimes I've been with lots of other people, remembering back on his journeys, on his travels, and really recognizing, who is he now? Who has he become? Okay? I am become a name for always roaming with a hungry heart. Much have I seen and known, cities of men and manners, climates, councils, government, myself not least, but honored of them all, and drunk delight of battle with my peers far on the ringing plains of windy Troy. So some of this is essentially is listing in a way. What have I seen? What has he seen on his travels? What has he learned throughout his life, right? He's learned about, cities, manners, climates. I find this hard when I've memorized this poem, and I find it hard to remember the list of these things because they're not particularly related. But here you start to see, too, where what really makes Tennyson work is there is something astoundingly resonant in his use of language. I mean, that's what you look for in Tennyson, is this sense of voice. And you look at a line like this. I mean, look at that line, and drunk delight of battle with my peers far on the ringing plains of windy Troy. I mean, there's something kind of magical that he's doing with language here, and it has to do with like the I sound in delight, being picked up and ringing, plains, windy. There's something about these lines that almost, this is Tennyson remembering, the clash of arms, the clash of steel on steel. And this is Ulysses remembering that, and Tennyson manages to capture that in the sounds of the lines, right? And now, backing out even a little bit more in terms of the perspective that he has on his life at this part, I am a part of all that I had met. Yet all experience is an arch wherethrough gleams that untraveled world whose margin fades forever and forever when I move. Now, some of this poem, it may be just entirely personal, but the way that I imagine this is thinking, it's not so much that Ulysses understands himself as an actor who has acted on the world. He is somebody who has been formed by the experiences he's had in the world. And when he looks now, even as he's trying to be introspective, he sees what's important to him as like this arch that he's looking out, and that the margins of that arch fade as he approaches or moves away from it. And then, these lines which come up, which are, some of the famous ones for better or for worse, how dull it is to pause, to make an end, to rust unburnished, not to shine in use, as though to breathe were life, right? Like our lives are not just about taking in breath in and out, right? What good is that? That even as you imagine him here as perhaps an older man, sort of saying, I don't want to be just some rusted out farm equipment, sitting out there rotting in the field. If you're a tool, the point is to use the tool, right? And the point is to do more than just breathe. It's to do something with your life.
I like the analogy too, like an involuntary reflex.
Yeah.
That's great.
Life piled on life were all too little, and of one to me little remains. Again, it's a colon here, but I'll pause. So, the idea here that, I don't have much life left, and all the life I've had is too little for me. This sense of appetite, an appetite for life, an embracing of life, and some things that Ulysses went through were, terrible, involved suffering and, the deaths of his comrades and terrible things. But for him, this sense of an old man saying, it's not nearly enough. There's not enough here for me.
So what do you think he's particularly intoxicated with? I think about this a lot too, in terms of like just how infatuated with knowledge I am. Like I wish I could live for 1,000 years so I could learn everything. And a bit of this project is motivated by that desire to just amass knowledge. What is it about what Ulysses is trying to say, or what Tennyson is trying to say here about Ulysses, about why he's so in love with life?
So I think that the way Tennyson imagines Ulysses at the end of his life, even though weakened by the inevitable end of our mortal lives, that his appetite for experience, for new things, for seeing what is beyond the horizon, is undiminished, right?
Is it just a simple wanderlust that Ulysses has?
Yeah, it is. Life piled on life were all too little, and of one to me little remains, but every hour is saved from that eternal silence, something more, a bringer of new things. And violet were for some 3 suns to store and hoard myself, and this gray spirit yearning in desire to follow knowledge like a sinking star beyond the utmost bounds of human thought. Right? So, I think, I'm not sure I need to, go over this. So, some of this is not entirely clear. Some 3 suns to store it and hoard myself. I don't know what that means particularly. But the idea of, every hour saved from that eternal silence, right? Every hour is something more. This gray spirit yearning in desire to follow knowledge like a sinking star. that the sense of appetite there.
Yeah, I think that describes my particular form of cerebral wanderlust.
So,
right,
so this, and this is, I think, what appeals to people about this poem, this really strong sense of character, this really strong sense of voice. That's what the poem is really about.
I have to say, when you were reading it, I found myself sort of translating it into song. I found myself swaying to the beat and to the pentameter. Has anyone ever set this to
That's
music?
a really interesting, not to my knowledge, and it would be it would be beautiful to do that.
It's interesting, the connection between poetry and music, how much poetry inspires other art forms. I'm just at the outset of looking at W.H. Auden's The Age of Anxiety, and apparently Leonard Bernstein turned it into a symphony, and someone else interpreted it as a ballet, but not necessarily using the words.
Well, but of course, when one of the ways to get kids into poetry is to start with song, because song, by definition, song, lyrics and song are poems, and you can look at them on their own too. So this is the end of the first stanza. It's long, and now he's moving. I imagine it's a dramatic monologue, right? This is Ulysses speaking, and I imagine him kind of pausing and turning, to his son Telemachus. This is my son, mine own Telemachus, to whom I leave the scepter and the isle. Well loved of me, discerning to fulfill this labor, by slow prudence to make mild a rugged people, and through soft degrees subdue them to the useful and the good. So again, in my imagination here, Telemachus is a different sort of person, right? Telemachus is somebody who is maybe more a king, more of a static king, someone who is able to make the trains run on time, someone who cares about, the machinery of the government that that he heads, right? And, most blameless is he. This is fine, centered in the sphere of common duties, decent not to fail in offices of tenderness, and pay meet adoration to my household gods when I am gone. He works his work, I mine. So again, the sense, this is who he is. He is my son, right? This is my son. This is someone I love. He is good at some things. Those are not the things that I'm good at. That's not who I am. Okay, and then we move to the third stanza where, my imaginative narrative of this, his imagination kind of starts to take over because, at this point, Ulysses, his sailors were killed. He came back, as I recall, almost alone. But now they're kind of coming back from him. And so one of the ways that you can look at this is that, perhaps what Ulysses' last voyage is a voyage, not out into the physical world, but, into death from life. That's certainly one way to look at it. So there lies the port, the vessel puffs her sail, there gloom the dark broad seas. My mariners, souls that have toiled and wrought and thought with me, that ever with a frolic welcome took the thunder and the sunshine, and oppose free hearts, free foreheads. You and I are old. Old age hath yet his honor and his toil. Death closes all, but something ere the end, some noble note may yet be done, not unbecoming men that strove with gods. Now, when I go through this at the end, I want to read the whole poem once because I think the sound of Tennyson is, as much as anything, what's so important here. But, certainly the picture here, too, of, sort of his mariners coming to collect him up, the vessels arriving, this idea that, death is going to close everything, but something still can be done. And I love that line, not unbecoming men, that strove with gods, this idea that, that Ulysses is sort of a grand example of what humanity can be, right? The light begin to twinkle from the rocks, the long day wanes, the slow moon climbs, the deep moans round with many voices. Come, my friends. Now, I'm going to stop there. I broke my own rule where I went by voices, but look at what's happening here. Look at what happens to the rhythm of the language, right? Look at how slow these lines are. And here's an example where he is varying, right? It isn't the long day wanes, the slow moon. It is technically iambic pentameter, but really there's something about these words, The long day wanes, the slow moon climbs, the deep moans round with many voices. And then it's going to pick up this final kind of peroration in this, right? Come, my friends, 'tis not too late to seek a newer world. Push off, and sitting well in order, smite the sounding furrows. For my purpose holds to sail beyond the sunset and the baths of all the western stars until I die. It may be that the gulfs will wash us down. It may be we shall touch the happy isles and see the great Achilles whom we knew. Though much is taken, much abides. And though we are not now that strength which in old days moved earth and heaven, that which we are, one equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak by time and fate, but strong in will, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. And that last line, I believe, is the motto of Outward Bound. And of course, this is where it comes from.
What's fascinating to me is that you know when to exercise different types of tempo in this. So as a layperson who would look at this and doesn't see any particular scoring or sort of marks that would indicate what the tempo, is it just because of the familiarity with the concepts that are going on that you know when to slow things down to speed them up, or are there giveaways for that as well?
Well, so let's start with the premise, right? And the premise that you're beginning with is that I'm not totally screwing it up. I hope that that's right, But what I would say, I mean, this was a favorite poem of my father's, who I've talked about a lot before. He memorized it, I memorized it. My idea of it is very much affected by the way that he did it. But no, I think that most of it, what I like to think in my imagination is I like to think that the rhythm and the words, the sounds of the poem that Tennyson created, if you pay attention to them, they give you the reading that is the reading I believe he wanted, and that is the most effective reading of the poem.
What do you think about people who take sort of liberties with it, who may dramatize aspects that you don't, or slow it down or speed it up in different areas? Do you think they're doing something unorthodox, or is poetry meant to be sort of interpreted in that way?
I don't know the answer to that question, because I don't know that I've ever really heard anyone else do this one. I've heard recorded versions of it online, and the ones that I've heard are pretty similar to what I do. So I tend to believe that there is, I don't want to say one right way of doing the poem, but that there's a finite universe of, the ways that are, that work. Now, if somebody can do it, totally differently and bring something to it and it works, I mean, of course I would be open to that. Yeah. I'm not trying to say, that there's, that I've got the only key to the poem. I think that the way that I read it makes sense, and so I'm certainly open to other ways. But this is the way the poem settles with me, because when you go through the process of studying something and memorizing something, you end up making decisions, and after a while they start to feel inevitable. It doesn't mean they're right, but it means that's the kind of way that you went with it.
Yeah.
So I'd like to go through it all once,
please do,
if that's okay. Just because, and I'm going to refer to it because I know it, but I think it's better if I have it in front of me. But
no one will think less of you.
Yeah. But it is, I think, important that it is a dramatic monologue, and so you have to kind of imagine as Ulysses. Maybe it's good I've grown this beard that's largely white, so that I can maybe have that a little bit to it.
We should dress you up for these.
Yeah,
man, that would be a
good idea. That would be good. Do my Last Duchess that way. Ulysses. It little profits that an idle king, by this still hearth, among these barren crags, matched with an aged wife, I meet and dole unequal laws unto a savage race that hoard and sleep and feed and know not me. I cannot rest from travel. I will drink life to the lees. All times I have enjoyed greatly, have suffered greatly, both with those that love me and alone, on shore, and when through scudding drifts the rainy Hyades vex the dim seas. I am become a name, for always roaming with a hungry heart. Much have I seen and known, cities of men and manners, climates, councils, governments, myself not least, but honored of them all, and drunk delight of battle with my peers far on the ringing plains of windy Troy. I'm a part of all that I have met, yet all experience is an arch wherethrough gleams that untraveled world, whose margin fades forever and forever when I move. How dull it is to pause, to make an end, to rust unburnished, not to shine in use, as though to breathe were life. Life piled on life were all too little, and of one to me little remains. But every hour is saved from that eternal silence something more, a bringer of new things. And violet were for some 3 suns to store and hoard myself, and this gray spirit yearning in desire to follow knowledge like a sinking star beyond the utmost bounds of human thought. This is my son, mine own Telemachus, to whom I leave the scepter and the isle. Well loved of me, discerning to fulfill this labor, by slow prudence to make mild a rugged people, and through soft degrees subdue them to the useful and the good. Most blameless is he, centered in the sphere of common duties, decent not to fail in offices of tenderness, and pay meet adoration to my household gods when I am gone. He works his work, I mine. There lies the port, the vessel puffs her sail, there gloom the broad dark seas. My mariners, souls that have toiled and wrought and thought with me, that ever with a frolic welcome took the thunder and the sunshine and opposed free hearts, free foreheads. You and I are old. Old age hath yet his honor and his toil. Death closes all, but something ere the end, some work of noble note may yet be done, not unbecoming men that strove with gods. The lights begin to twinkle from the rocks. The long day wanes, the slow moon climbs. The deep moans round with many voices. Come, my friends, 'tis not too late to seek a newer world. Push off, and sitting well in order, smite the sounding furrows. For my purpose holds to sail beyond the sunset and the baths of all the western stars until I die. It may be that the gulfs will wash us down. It may be we shall touch the happy isles and see the great Achilles whom we knew. Though much is taken, much abides. And though we are not now that strength which in old days moved earth and heaven, that which we are, we are. One equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak by time and fate, but strong in will, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield.
That was awesome. Definitely, the tenor of the poem changed when I didn't interrupt you. And just let you go. It's the masculinity of the poem really comes through.
Yeah. Well, and it's a dramatic monologue, and sometimes I worry a little bit about, I know I become kind of gravelly, and all that when I do it, but to me that's the voice, that is what that's what it seems to me that the poem wants to be. And I think that one of the early conversations that we had was, you had said that, when you were just learning a little bit about poetry, that you were, hearing this idea that it's meant to be heard, it's not meant to be just read. And that was a revelation to you as it was to me, and that's one of the reasons I thought this might be a good poem to look at, because this is a poem that you can't read this poem on the page. You have to chew this poem and really, get the sense of the meat of it and the resonance of it and the power of Tennyson's language, because that kind of, resonance is the key word that keeps coming back to me. It is so characteristic of Tennyson, so much who he is as a poet.
It'll be fascinating when we have a poem that requires multiple voices, especially if they become male and female voices within the same poem. I'm sure such poems exist.
Oh, yeah. Oh, sure. Absolutely.
It'll be kind of interesting. Well, maybe we could do like some sort of dramatic reading or something like that. We could have a cast or something. That might be fun.
It would.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, hon. I
my
really
pleasure.
appreciate it. All right. Next time, man.
All right. Sounds
see you
good.
guys.
Thanks.